You should be able to.
Everybody, I'd like to call to order the regular business meeting of the Board of Education of East Main School District 63. Roll call, please.
Ms. Pachkowski? Here. Ms. Eck?
Here.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Gluskin?
Here.
Ms. Urban?
Here.
Mr. Simmons?
Here.
And Ms.
Move on to the next agenda item, which is the recognition of audience or public comment. I have two emails that have been received that we're going to read tonight. Mrs. Piazza, are there any other requests for public comment?
No, those are the only two we have.
Okay. All right. I'm going to read these. The first is from a parent from Washington School, Rebecca McNaughton. I apologize. It says, I am writing again to share my concerns about the blended learning plan that was moved forward without communication of other options or meaningful details, or any discussion about the real challenge of how the teacher's divided attention will impact student engagement. In addition, I was disappointed that my previous concerns were not shared or addressed at the previous board meeting, as you indicated they would be. If this was an in-person board meeting, other parents in the community would have been able to hear the perspective advocating for continuing and enhancing effective remote learning. Again, the families who have chosen to attend in person are being given priority consideration, yet no reasons have been communicated by the board about why this is necessary. I realize that the classroom sizes need to be balanced. However, by the word of mouth knowledge that I have, it seems that 5 to 10 of the 25 students are choosing the in-person option, especially for the older grade levels. Thus, 60 to 80% of these students, a majority of the students, are being forced into a less effective learning environment. Since every student's experience will be impacted by blended learning, it would be helpful to provide parents with practical details of how a single teacher anticipates managing two classrooms effectively. This would ensure that everyone is able to manage expectations and allow parents and caregivers to partner with teachers to help the students in both learning environments. The board's presentation during the last meeting about the classroom IT configuration is really the bare minimum of detail that would be expected. For example, will the in-person students also be logged into the remote link so that the classroom is cohesive? How will the teachers manage the remote students if he or she can't see or hear if a student is being disruptive or needs attention? What backup support will be available if an in-person student is being disruptive or needs attention? How will language learning be impacted by the teachers' mouths being covered and word sounds being muffled by masks? Parents rely on the early childhood education professionals in District 63 to communicate the information that is needed for their children to succeed. I encourage the board to be proactive about communicating the realities and difficulties to be managed with the blended learning plan. The second email received today is from the Apollo staff, and I'll read that as well. Dear board members, several staff members would like to share concerns about future instructional models that you will be addressing tonight. No solution is perfect, but there is much to consider regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the students, staff, and families. Bullet points. Positivity rate differences for each community/zip code. Masking and distance presents a challenge for remote learners to hear clearly. Quarantine procedures for hybrid students and staff. Do we then return to remote vaccination? Do we then return to remote? Next bullet point, vaccinations for staff. Reconvening the entire staff in the building at Apollo that is upwards of 60 people. Hybrid presents unbalanced classroom. 70% remote and 30% hybrid at Apollo. Another method of instruction introduced when comfortably routine has been established. Resource staff are challenged to meet minutes and have to revise schedules each time a new instruction plan is implemented. Students with high special needs will struggle with this blended model. Transition times for SPED resource classes will be challenging. Schedules based on hybrid model logistics and not by instructional levels, best practice. Related services are in multiple buildings and classrooms throughout the district working with students who may or may not be able to wear a mask, and in many cases, social distancing is not feasible. PFA staff may be required to be in the building all morning and then be allowed to leave for afternoon instruction. Respectfully, several concerned Apollo staff. On behalf of the board, we thank both Mrs. Naughton and the Apollo staff for taking the time to share your concerns with the board. We're going to be reviewing the plan for the blended learning model again this evening, along with support and training that's being provided to the staff to help them understand, to help our students to be successful with this new teaching model. And just a reminder too, and we've talked about this in the last couple of meetings, the presentation from the December meeting is on the website. It's very inclusive. It talks a lot about what the concerns that are being raised here. So I hope you have a chance to take a look at that as well. All right. Let's move on to the next presentation, which is the fiscal year 20 audit, and I will turn it over to Mr. Camps.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Good evening, everybody. Just very briefly before I pass it on to Mr. Andy Mace, who is the partner in charge with Wipfli, formerly Klein Hall CPAs. So he was the partner in charge of the audit. In board docs, I've uploaded a couple of documents for you. This is obviously the fiscal year 20 audit. The audit actually, the physical audit concluded in September, but it took a couple more months to finalize all documentation. What you have in board docs is two documents. The first one would look like this if you were in person, and this is typically what you get at the meeting. For obvious reasons, we are uploading it into board docs, so you can download it. We will make sure you get a hard copy of this. It's the comprehensive annual financial report, which is basically the main product of the audit. We will make sure you get a hard copy of this at the next board meeting, assuming we are in person. If you need it sooner than that, we will mail it out to you. The second document that is in board docs is the required letters, that's what they're called, to the members of the board. There's three letters. The first one is the independent auditor report on internal controls. The second one is the management letter. Both of these focus on what was done in the audit in terms of internal controls. The third one is called communication with those in charge of governance. That would be the board, of course. And it's a little more broad. It is a more broad summary touching on a few other things on the audit, like if there were any issues found, for example, it would be shown there. There weren't any. But those are the documents in board docs. We'll make sure you get hard copies of the next board meeting. However, we can mail them to you if you want them sooner. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Andy Mace.
Thanks, Jordy. So if you have your document with you, I'm going to refer to some page numbers and go over the report briefly. As Jordy mentioned, this is a comprehensive annual financial report, and that differs from the reports that most school districts get. Only about 50 districts in the state go to the added effort of creating the comprehensive annual financial report, which includes the introductory section and statistical section that most audit reports don't have. Additionally, this report has been submitted for a number of years to the Association of School Business Officials International's Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting program, and has been an award winner for many, many years. I would anticipate that this report would also receive the award. So that's what separates it from the other reports. I always like to talk about our audit opinion on page 1. Here we state that we conducted our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, as well as government auditing standards because of the federal funds you receive, and that it is our opinion that these financial statements are presented fairly in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. So that's a big mouthful, but what that means basically is that's a clean audit opinion. And again, most districts in the state have some sort of qualification in our audit opinion, either mostly for cash basis reporting or for non-GAAP basis presentations. So the district continues to exercise the best practice in financial reporting for school districts. Then on page 4 begins the management's discussion and analysis. And if you don't read any further in this 120-page document, the first page and the MD&A will give you a good understanding of what occurred financially within the district. After that, then, on pages 14 and 15 are the entity-wide financial statements. And these are different than the fund financial statements in which you live, really, because it includes all long-term assets and liabilities. So it has things like your capital assets and your long-term debt, which aren't shown in the funds, and the operating statement there even shows depreciation expense. But you live in the fund world. Pages 16 and 18 are the balance sheet and operating statement of the governmental funds. The general fund is a combination of the ed, operations and maintenance, working cash, and tort funds. We'll see additional detail in the back there. But the thing to note on page 18, if you look at your fund balances compared to your annual expenditures, you're clearly in a very good, healthy position. So the district has been managing its funds well and is fortunate to have some fund balance there. And there's good reasons to have fund balance. I always like to talk about this. That is, one, simply for cash flow purposes. You know, in Cook County, you get your taxes in March and September. So from September to March, you have a good 6 months there that you need to go between tax distributions. It also allows you to afford things that crop up that you don't anticipate, such as COVID and that sort of thing. But also, it enables you to be able to react to any curveballs the state might throw your way. And I'll show you an example of one here in a few minutes. Beginning on page 21, then, are the notes for the financial statements. And here we discuss the significant accounting policies, revenue recognition, those kinds of things. I'm skipping ahead here to pages 31, 32. That's where we outline the district's cash and investment holdings at the end of the year. The thing to take away here is that of all the deposits with financial institutions, the district was either entirely insured or collateralized. So that represents the safest way to hold your funds. Excuse me. Page 34 is your capital asset activity for the year. And of course, you'll see significant capital outlay there as a result of the renovation projects and improvements that you've been doing here the last few years. Page 35 is a summary of the long-term debt. And here we have, the big thing here is the 3 bond issues that you've had issued here in the last few years to fund these construction projects. You did pay down some of it this year. The end of the year was about $48.9 million of outstanding long-term debt. And by no means is that excessively large for a district your size. So you can continue to be in good shape there. A couple of things to note there on page 35, though, too, are the liabilities related to both the pension funds that the district participates in and the other post-employment benefit funds. These numbers are large. You know what? I'll skip ahead here to page 39. 39 shows the makeup of the liabilities related to TRS. The total district or the total liability related to the district is $169.9 million. Now, the district share of that is just about 2.4 million. The state's on the hook for the rest of that. But, even a district, average elementary sized district like 63, you're looking at $170 million of unfunded pension liability. Moving ahead to page 45, you see a different scenario for IMRF. IMRF, you levy for it, and your contributions change each year based on the actuarial requirements. That liability actually went down a couple of $1 million for the year. The main driver there being for calendar year 2019, which is the period of which this information is presented, you had much better interest earnings in the IMRF fund than the previous year. Page 48, and this is the one that sometimes worries me. You might have heard me talk about this last year. The Teachers Health Insurance Security Fund, the other post-employment benefits, the GAP health insurance for certified employees. The total liability there is $60.2 million. And what worries me about this one is that, unlike the pensions, it doesn't have the constitutional requirement that the state provides. So this is another benefit that is not being funded. The district share of this is about $25.5 million. The state share is about $34.6 million. Well, what worries me about this is if there's, we're always worried about the state pushing things back onto the local districts. To me, this would be a prime candidate. We see the district's contribution rates creep up every year. You would never have to write a check for $25.5 million, but it wouldn't surprise me if that creeps up. Now, I haven't heard any rumblings to that effect. That's just my opinion you're hearing there. Excuse me. There's also, on page 53, the district for the non-certified staff also has some gap insurance, its own post-employment benefit plan. And your liability there is about $250,000. Again, that one is not funded. It's operated on a pay-as-you-go basis. Excuse me. Beginning on pages 56 through about 68, there's all kinds of schedules, what we call required supplementary information, to give you historical context on the funding of these pension and OPEB plans. Beginning on page 67 and 68, then, is the breakout of the four funds that comprise the district's general fund. And you can see the year end on page 68, the Ed Fund had about $36.7 million, O&M $6 million, Working Cash $6 million, toward immunity about $1 million, all of which compare favorably to annual expenditures. Then beginning on page 69, and throughout the rest of the financial statements, there's detailed line by line comparisons of the expenditures compared to budget and to the prior year. One thing to note there is that it looks like the district had a budget overage, but because you didn't budget for the on behalf payment, that we're required to recognize an amount of revenue and a like amount of expenditure that the state would kick into TRS and PHIS. If not for that budget variance, you would have been right at budget for the year end. So what that tells me is the district lays out a financial plan and you stick to it. I think it demonstrates excellent fiscal management. Excuse me. So you could thumb through there and see how you did on a line item basis. After that, then, oh boy, excuse me. Must be dry in my house. After that, then, on the statistical section, here we have a whole series of 10-year data. You could get an excellent understanding of where you've been at, what your trends look like. There's sections on operating statistics, debt capacity, revenue capacity, trends, demographic and operating information. It's a whole host of really good information. And you can, if you look at the enrollments and numbers of employees, et cetera, you can see how that would relate to the expenditures of the district. That's really about it for the audit report. As Jordy mentioned at the outset, we had no formal management letter comments. The district continues to operate in an excellent manner, they're good stewards of your finances. They're in the required communication letter. We're supposed to talk about whether there are any differences of opinion or problems encountered, and of course there were not. But the district, our understanding of how you operate is that you have an excellent organizational attitude towards the importance of internal controls, and you have the right people in the right places. So I can only say that you're doing an excellent job, and keep up the good work. So, any questions for me?
All right, just
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
sorry. No, just sounds like there's no questions. Thank you, Mr. Mays. Again, I want to thank you for your team's professionalism. That's always been the case. Their independence when they come in and audit us on behalf, audit our district. So to members of the board, I just want to take 20 seconds to recognize my team. That those are the people that are in the day-to-day of all these transactions that make up the numbers you are looking at, and they make sure things are done right. If we make a mistake in something, it is fixed quickly. So I just wanted to take 20 seconds to recognize them. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can contact me, and I will make sure you get these reports in hard copy at the next meeting or sooner if you need them. Just let me know.
Great. Mr. Camps, on behalf of the board, we just thank you for all of your excellent work and the work that your staff does on a continual basis. It's really appreciated. We're so lucky to have the expertise that we do in our business office.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mace. We appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Before we move on, I just want to quickly, I know we talked about that we're going to be reviewing the blended learning model again, but I also wanted to say that we're going to be also talking about the support and the training being provided to the staff to help them, to help our students be successful with this new learning model. Also wanted to just mention again, I know I talked about the December 3rd presentation, which you can see online, but I want to direct you, it's on the main page under the Back to School 2021 tab. Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions? Roll call, please.
Ms. Eck?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Gluskin?
Yes.
Ms. Urban?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes,
And Ms. Ketchkowski?
Yes.
and that motion passes. Thank you. We can move on now to reports. I do not have anything to report this evening, so I will pass it on to any board members that would like to report. Kind of a quiet period over the holidays, right? Not a lot to report. Okay, let's move on to Dr. Clay then, Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Tom. I just want to first acknowledge what happened in our country yesterday. Our democracy yesterday was tested in a way that most of us never thought would be possible in this country. As many of us watched the events unfold on television, the scene looked more like the overthrow of a third world government than what we have come to expect from our fellow citizens. Unfortunately, what we were watching was indeed an insurrection within our own nation's capital. As sad and shocking as that was, today we should all find comfort in the fact that our institutions held and our democracy is still intact. I hope for healing and comfort for our country as we move on from this sad incident. On to other information. We have been preparing for our return to in-person instruction and our blended learning model. Although we are once again starting something new, which seems to be a staple of life during the pandemic, I know without a doubt that the outstanding staff of District 63 will impress everyone with the quality of instruction they will continue to provide our students. That being said, I do want to ask everyone to be patient for the first few days as all of us, staff, students, and parents get used to this new structure. There will obviously be some bumps on the road, and it'll take a few days to get things settled into a good routine. Also, we continue to watch for news about the vaccine, and we're hoping it will soon be available for school personnel. There still isn't a vaccine for students, for children under 16. But we're hopeful for that to come in the near future. Once the vaccines are available, we will do everything we can to get those vaccines to the people who need them the most. And then finally, although we don't normally respond in the board meeting to public comment, I have had an opportunity to interact with Ms. McNaughton, who was the parent who we had the email from today, to try to understand what the concern was. And I think I finally understand what the confusion is and why people are feeling like they don't understand why we're making this shift to our blended program. So I just want to take a minute to talk about that real quickly. Hopefully there are some parents who are watching. On the surface, what Ms. McNaughton is asking about, and apparently other parents are too, is why couldn't we have just taken our old program, reshuffled students, realigned our class sizes, and had people commit to that being where they were going to stay for the remainder of the year? On the surface, like I said, that does make a lot of sense. But here's the big problem. Those numbers don't fall evenly. Even though we're 60% remote and 40% blended across the district, that varies from every school to school and from grade level to grade level. So what that would have meant to stay in that old model was that we were again faced with having to reshuffle students to different teachers. And at that time, it would have meant many students changing schools, teachers moving from one school to another, to teachers moving from grade level to grade level in order to make things work out the way they needed to. Okay, for example, you could have had a first grade with, very few kids in person. So you had a couple extra teachers, but you needed those teachers because your fifth grade remote classes or the fifth grade remote classes at another school were too large, and those teachers would move over there. This switch for kids would have meant that many of them were going to get their third or maybe even fourth teacher for the school year. So one of the big reasons we made this shift was that we couldn't maintain that model, and we did not want kids having to relearn a whole new class, a whole new teacher again. So with the move we've made, most of our kids have returned to their original teacher. Not everybody, because again, that didn't work out as neatly as you might think it would. This move also allows for easier quarantining of students. Under the old model, if a student had to quarantine, we had to move them to a different class so that they could be remote. Under this model that we're moving to, they'll still be with their same class, they will just go remote. Also in this model, when teachers have to quarantine, if they are not sick and able to teach, they can move really easily into a fully remote teaching model since they're already teaching remote. Under the old plan, some of our teachers were only teaching in person, so they weren't prepared to suddenly go to a remote option. So there are lots of reasons, but the main reason was to stabilize the situation. We were reviewing too many shifts for kids and teachers, which obviously is not healthy. So we hope everybody will stay patient. This should be the final shift in our instructional plan, unless, the universe throws another curveball at us with this pandemic. But moving forward, we think everybody will be happy once we get settled into this new plan. That's all, Tom. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Clay. Okay, let's move on to student performance. Mr. Robertson.
Good evening, board members. You will find the data that I will just quickly give an overview of in board docs. I am going to be talking about our attendance data and our work completion data as well. Just to give you a quick caveat to this information, we only had 2 weeks for actually in-person instruction for students between our last board meeting and this one. So this information is going to encompass about half the instructional time that I've been reporting to you over the course of the school year. If you look at the first data table of information, this is our attendance information. There is an average percentage for every single grade level between December 1st and the 18th. You'll also see at the bottom a district average, and then you can click access to see all of this information by grade level and by school. Something that I did share with you at the last board meeting, for the month of September and October, we were averaging district-wide around 97% attendance rates. That dipped a little bit in November to about 95%. That was not too overly worrisome, knowing that historically around holidays, we tend to have our absences tick up just a little bit. For the month of December, we did actually tick back up to about 96% as a district average. So as I said at the last board meeting, we will continue to pay close attention to this information and make sure that we're not seeing a consistent dip in our attendance district-wide. And if we are, then we'll definitely be putting some practices into place to increase those attendance rates. If you scroll down just a little bit, I have some information for you for work completion. If you remember, I've been reporting to you by grade level a UA designation through Power School, which stands for unable to assess. This is in the event that a student does not attend class enough that a teacher can assess a student on a particular standard. The next column is the amount of students at each grade level that were provided some sort of a standards-based grade. So that's through the 1 through 4 designation that we have for standards-based grading. And then I also compile those together to give you a work completion rate. So you will see here, we're at the beginning of a trimester for the most part at the moment. So we currently have no students that have received an unable to assess designation in Power School. So typically at the beginning of a trimester, teachers will have multiple opportunities to assess students on standards. So as we get closer to the end of trimester 2, we might get a better idea of how many students they're not able to assess currently. You will see our number is quite a bit smaller on standards that have been assessed so far. Again, it was only 2 weeks between our last board meeting, and we're still kind of at the beginning of trimester 2. And because we have no students that have been given unable to assess designations, our work completion rate currently is right around the 100% range. Again, as we get closer to the end of the trimester, we get a better idea of students that are not able to make up work, or teachers are not able to assess them because they're not completing work. And then I will pass it on to Mrs. Pacheco, who will talk a little bit about our social emotional data and follow up with students.
Looks like Ms. Pacheco's having difficulties.
That's okay. I will, is she even in the Google session right now? Okay.
She is.
Oh, okay. She's frozen. So I will do my best. I hope whenever Mrs. Pacheco gets back in, she will cut me off and jump right in. But if you will look and scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the social emotional information. What we started doing for you is what we're presenting at each board meeting is included on this report. So you'll see October's information. You will see November's information as well. I'll just quickly review what it says here for December. School-based teams continued their outreach efforts through the month of December. Aside from supporting social emotional learning, many social workers also did home visits to check in with families and deliver holiday care packages made through the We Care campaign. We also saw an increase in referrals to outside agencies, but it should be noted that this increase is comparable to other years, as we often refer families in need to community resources and organizations for support around the winter holidays. Just a quick summary here of the information. Over the month of December across the district, there were 42 referrals to social workers or school psychologists for additional follow-up support. 20 of those referrals resulted in additional referrals to school-based problem-solving support teams. 18 referrals to building administrators for additional follow-up and support, and 11 of those referrals resulted in work with school-based problem-solving teams and support. And then 21 referrals were sent out to community agencies to support our families with varying needs that they had. Mrs. Pacheco, I see that you jumped right in. I read your report, but I'm sure if the board has questions for you, they can ask.
I'm just wondering, in terms of the referrals and the numbers, how do they compare this school year versus last school year or previous years? Were you able to hear me?
Yeah, Mrs. Pacheco, I think that one's for you.
She heard him, but we can't hear her.
Mrs. Pacheco is the one who actually kind of analyzed the data and oversaw that process. At least what I can tell you now, until she can come back and answer that question, this increase that we saw around this holiday time is pretty comparable to what we've seen in previous years. Okay. Especially around the winter holidays, we tend to have families that are looking for food supports or some other needs they need support with. So, and Mrs. Pacheco, I don't know how your audio is working. You can feel free to jump in and. Okay. It looks like it's still not working. So, Mr. Simmons, maybe later if she pops in, she can provide any context I wasn't able to.
Great, thank you. Board members, any other questions of Mr. Robertson? Okay. All right, let's thank you, and we're going to move on to the operations report. Mr. Berry?
Good evening, everybody. I have a few little updates for you this evening. At the Early Learning Center, the wall coverings are on schedule to be completed on the 11th, this coming Monday. And the controls and lighting commissioning is still underway, and IHC has set an end date, or the end of January is the final completion date on that. And then there are some items that have to be addressed in the retention area, which won't probably happen until spring when the weather clears. At Gemini, the mechanical contractor is on site Wednesday, and they completed their punch list. So we are finished with the inside punch list work. The only items remaining really at Gemini are the track items, which is the surface of the track, the sand for the long jump pit, and the concrete base for the shot put area. Then I'm also working currently with DLA and our engineers. We're starting to prepare our bid packages for our summer 2021 projects. Those are replacement of the exterior doors and frames, replace and upgrading the exterior parking lot lighting at all locations, locker painting at all buildings except Gemini and Apollo, new sign for the FRC to match the rest of our district signs with message board, and improve the drainage at the Nelson and Washington fields.
Great. Any questions?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks. All right, let's move on to new business. First item up is the District 63 metrics review and discussion. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Clay.
All right, thank you. Before I start talking about the positivity rates and our metrics, I'm going to ask couple things from Mr. Roberson. So Aaron, would you please just review quickly for everybody what the training is that we're doing for the staff to prepare for the blended learning?
Sure. So after our board meeting in December, the actual instructional plan was shared with our staff. Staff had about a week to spend some time reviewing that, along with our instructional plan. There's about 12 pages of detailed information, all about whole group instruction, all the way to what we do when we're pulling students out for small group and meeting with them in one-to-one scenarios, and a ton of great information. So that plan was shared with staff. There was a correlating webinar that went a little bit deeper into the information about what could this plan actually look like in practice in the classroom. Then, right before we went on winter break, we had meetings with job-alike groups throughout the district, largely at the elementary level. If you remember at the last board meeting, really Gemini and our preschool are not necessarily following the blended learning model like our elementary classrooms are. So we had discussion sessions with teachers asking a plethora of questions related to this plan and what this might look like. An FAQ document was put together so that any teachers that were unable to participate in those sessions could get the important information answered. And then this week, now that we came back, we actually start the technology training portion of the blended learning model. So starting tomorrow, Apollo is the first elementary school that will start getting intensive technology training. So every grade level will have a concentrated hour with our digital learning coaches and technology department, actually working through the technology that will be available to them. In addition to that training, teachers have been allotted 2 asynchronous learning days. And just to clarify what that means, teachers between now and the implementation of blended learning have been able to create learning days for students where teachers aren't necessarily facilitating live instruction. Students are doing some independent learning that the teachers planned and created for them. But that allows 2 full days for teachers to not only get their time with technology training, but to also plan and prepare for the implementation of blended learning here, if all goes to plan on beginning on January 19th. So we know that this blended learning model is causing some trepidation for everyone. This is something we haven't accomplished before. But something I can say is last March, we went through a similar process of how do we do remote learning. We haven't had years of experience or training to do this. And as we went through the process, it got easier. And obviously we're at a pretty robust remote learning model and plan in where we are currently in the district. So really our focus here at the beginning wasn't necessarily the instructional pieces of remote and in-person learners. We've done both of those things separately, not always together, but we're going to work through those pieces as we implement this. We really wanted to attack the technology pieces and hope that teachers would feel comfortable with fluently using technology for remote and in-person learners. So then once we get that under our belts, we can really focus on some of those high quality instructional pieces and keep refining those. So that training starts now. I believe the last school next week, if I remember correctly, is Washington Elementary. Next Thursday, they'll be the last school to be trained. And then before the anticipated implementation of blended learning, all of our teachers will have that technology training and an additional day and a half of planning time to prepare for this. In addition to that, that was some focused training. Our technology department has created a number of job aids, tutorial videos for our staff to watch and utilize. Our instructional coaches have been an important part of this process and will continue to support teachers and educators at the building on some of the best ways to make this work. So that's currently where we are at the moment. Obviously, going forward, professional development will continue to be a goal so that we continue to refine and make this instructional model the best it can be.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Also, there is an understandable misperception still that this model will require teachers to manage 2 separate classrooms, one in front of them and one online. And I was wondering if maybe Aaron and possibly Keith could explain how the technology we're providing and the process that teachers will be using will prove that that's not accurate. They won't be teaching two separate classrooms.
Yeah, and maybe Mr. Schaefer, if you want to talk about the technology that we're implementing to bridge the two things, and I can round out the caboose with some instructional pieces.
Yes, thank you. We're using some multiple computers in the classroom, one connected to a presentation system that will be connected to a web camera and Bluetooth headset for the teacher. And they'll also be using their laptop or Chromebook to work with students both in the classroom and remotely, but they'll be working with them as a one group. Some will be in front of them, some will be in in their homes, but it's not two classrooms. They're going to be using the technology to allow them to work with them collaboratively and pretty much in real time synchronously.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. And maybe just to give you an example that might be a good way to illustrate this for families. It is right to assume that the teacher is going to have a portion of their class is going to be in a different location. And so there's naturally going to be some things that teachers have to work out with their own. There's an art and science to teaching, and the art of balancing all of that with your own class of students will be something that teachers continue to work on. But I think I gave an example last time of reading instruction. Maybe I'll give an example this time of what math instruction might look like in a blended learning model. Typically, when we're doing new instruction for a day for math, there's typically a mini lesson of sorts that a classroom teacher will facilitate so that students are getting grade level instruction. When that is happening, the entire class will be engaging with the teacher during that time. That will include students that are in person and students that are at home. And the teacher, again, there's an art to how the teacher works to engage both groups at the same time. When the teacher is asking questions, it's possible that, when the teacher is asking, talk to someone next to you or talk to a partner, those students are going to be doing the same things at home as they would in person. It's not that the teacher teaches one group and the other group works on something and the teacher completely goes to the remote learners. We're trying to do this all at the same time. Typically, after we have some sort of grade level lesson or grade level instruction, we move into some different pieces when math. And when students are working on some of their independent work to practice some of the application activities that they're working on based on the teacher's instruction, that's when the teacher has a chance to do some small group instruction and conferring with students to check in with them. That will, while students are working independently, just like we would in the classroom, the teacher would float around the classroom and check in with students in person, and then obviously go to the Google Meet where the remote students are and do the exact same thing with them remotely. So really, we are trying to have students participate in the same instruction at the same time. We just have a group of them in a different location. And so navigating kind of the ins and outs of how that works for every teacher in every classroom will be what we'll be working on. But it's not completely different lessons and activities for both groups. We are really trying to have students at home and in person to have as similar of experiences as possible.
All right. Thank you, Keith and Aaron. That was helpful. Board members, do you have any questions or comments about what they just spoke about?
I just would like to say, from a teacher perspective in a different district, this training sounds unbelievable. And Aaron, I would love to talk to you separately, and I don't want to put you on the spot because I just want parents and everybody else who's listening to know this is not done everywhere. I have had no training whatsoever, and we are doing the exact same thing. So any training that we in my district get, it's on your own. You kind of figure it out. So for you guys to give all this time and energy and effort and money well spent, I just applaud you for this, and I would just love to hear more about it at a different time. But our students are very, very lucky. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words, Mrs. Urban. There is a great team that I'm working with that is putting this all together, especially our technology department. So thank you.
Okay, I'll move into talking about the metrics and where we are right now. As of today, we are we're still on board to bring kids back starting on the 19th. But board members and anybody who has access to, or anybody watching, on our board agenda under this item, there is an attachment there that has all the statistics from our school board that or not from our school board, from our school district that I'm going to be reviewing here briefly. So if you want to look at that, they're all there. So right now, our average positivity rates as of yesterday is 7.35%. So that is in the gray area for us, but it is below our 8%. And then there's a wide range from one community to another. Displays, which is where 40% of our kids come from, or 44% of our kids live in the Displays unincorporated area. That has an 8.12% positivity rate. Glenview, which is a much smaller portion, 7% of our kids have a Glenview address, and that's at 8.66%. Morton Grove is looking better than those two communities. That's at 6.11%, and Morton Grove is about 17% of our student population, so a pretty good sized chunk. Niles is our second biggest area for our students to live, and that's 30% of our kids, and that community is doing really well right now at 5.08%. Park Ridge, for some reason, has the highest positivity rate of those, but fortunately is also a very small portion of our student population. That's only 2% of our kids who have a Park Ridge zip code, and they're at 9.54%. But in this document that I referred to, you can see what the trends are. If you look at the first chart there that shows the trends for the district average, it's been pretty stable. It's on a little bit of an uptick right now, it looks like maybe, but it's been hovering between the high 6% and the mid 7%. So it's pretty stable. And then you can see the other communities. There's a little bit of an uptick in some of them. Some of them are staying pretty stable. The challenge right now is that we're still in that period where we don't know the complete effect of the winter break travel. Many people supposedly just got back from their travels this past weekend, so we may or may not see some more of an uptick. So my first question to the board is about your comfort level with still moving forward, planning to bring kids back on the 19th.
Well, it sounds like we're moving in the right direction, and it's exciting to think that the kids will start to be able to come back. Hopefully, like you just mentioned, that we don't see an uptick because of the travel. I, at this point, would be in favor of moving forward with it.
I would agree with that. I think our district, as opposed to others, has actual metrics in place. We can agree to disagree with depending on who you talk to, whether the metrics are but at least we have metrics, which is more than many districts. And I agree, as long as we stay within the metrics. If we see an uptick, then we make a decision to do something different. But at this point, I agree. I think let's go with the plan that we've worked on for so many months, and we brought kids back for 2 weeks, and there will be bumps along the way. But I also want to add, I know I've heard from a few people saying, well, why can't we just wait till the vaccine comes on, everybody gets vaccinated? I don't think there is a mandate from the state or from the district or the federal government at this point that everybody has to get vaccinated. So it could be months or years, right, before that would actually happen. So we need to execute a plan to try and bring kids back.
I would agree with both what Tom had to say and
I agree as well. I appreciate the thorough presentation of the metrics and the explanation of the percentages of each population. It just gives me a little bit of more understanding of how you're viewing it all as a whole. And I would feel comfortable. I am grateful for the 2 weeks because I think that was a wise choice. So we can wait and see how it all plays out, especially this weekend. And hopefully it'll stay where it's at or even maybe go a little lower. We can think positively.
So piggybacking off on that, so what happens if next week it unfortunately goes up instead of going down? Are we just notify parents and we just decide we're going to go week by week, or what's the plan moving forward on if we do have to end up going remote? Do we go remote by a week, by 2 weeks? That
was my next question for the board, Sheila, was what do we do? Do you want if we start to show an uptick that our average gets above 8%, do we want to call an emergency board meeting like we did the other time? Do you want us to make the call? And do we do it for a week or two to see what it is? I'm curious what the board's thoughts are on that.
It's a tough one.
It is.
It's a hard question to answer, but obviously, I think the fact that we've been so consistent, though, in following the metrics, if they do go over 8%, I'm just speaking, for myself at this point, I think we need to follow the metric, and it means we need to close again. We don't want to, but if that's what the metric says, and we've been sort of allegiant to that, we need to follow that. I would be willing to entertain a 1 week at a time break, because the numbers may change fairly quickly. As we get further out away from the holidays, it may drop off. So to have to wait 2 weeks rather than a week might be the way to go.
Tom, I think you make a good point. Typically we haven't liked the 1 week thing because it leaves so much uncertainty. But we've had enough history now with this pandemic to know that our communities, once we have an uptick, they bring it back down pretty quickly. We've never stayed really high for very long. We have some really responsible community members who, if you're out and about, you notice they're really good about wearing their masks and social distancing. So I do feel like the 1 week thing probably would be appropriate.
I agree with that as well. I also agree with Tom. It's tough to call, but I think 1 week at a time. I think the way this year has gone, and the last year I should say, is we just need to make sure we let parents know that there's got to be some flexibility there. We don't know if it's going to go up or down. Nobody does. We hope it goes down. We make plans based on that. But if it goes up, I think my only question would be, I think we gave a 24-hour notice. I think that's something we may need to decide. If it goes up, does it go up for a day above 8%? Is it 2 days? Do we immediately give notice? Do we, how does that work? Because that might be the tricky part as well. And I don't know that we have an answer for that we can come up with today, but it's probably something to think through.
Right. Yeah, the tricky part will be if it happens again that on the 17th, suddenly we've hit the metric and we haven't, do we bring anybody in on Tuesdays because everybody's planning on it? There's a gray area there too, obviously.
I mean, I think if it happens before we bring kids in, it's probably simpler to just say, let's keep going remote. I'm more concerned about if we have kids in for 3 days, like right. we had some people in already or some kids in, do we say, all right, we're gonna plan to give 48 hours notice or 2 days notice or whatever it is, unless the metrics go, sky high crazy, and then we make a different decision. But, if it's 8.03, 48 hours seems like a reasonable amount of time to get folks situated again. If it, God forbid, it jumps to 23% overnight, then, that might be a completely different discussion.
Right.
I agree with all that. I think the reason this discussion can be had is the way we're going forward with the kids staying with their teacher, no matter what. That makes the week-to-week kind of watching the numbers work, because they're staying with their teacher no matter what. If they're in their house or they're at their school, it it remains constant. And I think if anything, we've learned in the past year that a week by week watch is okay. We can be patient. If we have to stay home for a week, that's okay. And, I think just playing it by ear. I agree though with the either at least 24 hours and maybe 48 would be good, especially for this first part. Like if we know by Sunday, I think because we were talking about a Tuesday. I don't know what other people are thinking though.
I would agree. I think we keep to following the metrics as we have week to week. And I would like 48 hours notice. 24 hours is a little tight. And I know some people would say 48 hours is tight, but I think that's kind of what we did last time. I think it was 48 hours. And I would like to, and maybe we put that out there so our parents know it's going to be 48 hours notice.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. Unless there's, as I said, exceptional conditions, something drastic happens that we cannot predict, then we may have to have some more flexibility. But in a regular world, if it goes from 7.9 to 8.1 to 8.2, then 48 hours seems very reasonable.
Yeah.
Sounds good. A question regarding when the kids return, what services, if any, will be provided through expanded learning?
Good evening. Expanded learning, we're going to jump back into what we had provided in the fall. So we have a full day program for families who have opted for remote but need childcare. We have the afternoon program where students will be bused from their home schools to the resource center and be picked up or take the bus home at the end of their school day, or they have the option to then stay in our aftercare program until 5 or 6 p.m.
That's great. That's really going to be helpful to parents. I had heard from a couple parents and they were asking that question. So that's great to know. Thank you.
Yes. And that'll go out in our communications. Our websites are updated. We're currently taking registrations.
Excellent. All right. Anything else on the topic? Scott, your mic is off.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple things before we leave the topic. We as a administrative team and the school board, we've been very cautious with this virus and bringing kids and staff into the buildings, and I've probably been one of the most cautious among us because I worry about all those lives that we're in charge of. But I have to tell everybody, and I'm hoping our teachers are listening too, that I feel so confident about our ability now to keep people safe as long as the positivity rates stay where they are now or a little lower, because we've learned a lot. We've learned from other areas that there is not widespread virus infection in schools, and we've learned that schools are a controlled environment as long as we make sure that we're following all the rules and the social distancing guidelines and wearing the PPE. We are controlling our environment, and that's why there isn't widespread. We can control that in our schools, and the fact that we had kids in for a few weeks showed us that the kids are pretty compliant. We haven't yet seen how our older kids will be with that, but our young ones were very compliant with wearing their masks and following the rules about social distancing. So I am extremely confident that we can do this as long as the positivity rates don't go haywire again. But things, I think I know that we're going to be fine, and we'll continue to follow the metrics and keep everybody's safety at the forefront of our decisions.
Sounds great. All right. Thank you, everybody, for all your input. We'll keep our fingers crossed. It's only a couple weeks away. All right. Thank you. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the donations as listed?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. May I have a motion to approve the COVID substitute teacher rate for the remainder of the 2021 school year in the amount of $200 per day?
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Schleiser, any comment on this?
Well, we know that we have a national, state, and district substitute teacher shortage, and we've tried a number of approaches to increase our subpool. And while we have increased our rates, we also know that others have increased their rates to around $200 and have had some success. We know it's a really challenging environment now, and we want to compensate our subs well, and we think that this may increase the number of people coming to our district to work. And if we can get more subs, it limits disruption. We can have more consistency for kids, more consistency for teachers, and generally just, I think, a more positive and productive learning environment for all.
Absolutely. And it sounds like budget-wise, we're pretty much going to be in line because we haven't really spent that this school year.
We're in good shape budgetarily because we've spent very little on substitute teachers this year. And remember that we still have a number of teachers who are remote teaching, so they don't require subs. So our need for subs will be a little smaller than in the past. So I am hopeful that we will be able to staff our positions, and we are continuing to actively interview. And after, should the board approve this rate, we will start a advertising campaign in an effort to pull more candidates into the district.
Okay, great. Board members, any questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Gluskin?
Yes.
Ms. Urban?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Kachkowski?
Yes.
Ms. Deck?
Yes.
And that motion passes. May I have a motion to approve review and release of closed session minutes deemed appropriate for public inspection?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Dr. Clay, nothing on this?
Not really. No, we're not recommending that we release any at this point because we've done so many in the past. We cleaned up a lot of those files. And right now we just don't have any that we are recommending to release.
Okay, very good. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gluskin?
Yes. Sorry.
Ms. Urban?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Kachkowski?
Yes.
Ms. Deck?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
And that motion passes. Thank you. That covers our agenda for the evening. Our next meeting is scheduled for February 4th at 7 p.m. We are scheduled to be in the Galaxy Theater at Apollo, barring any changes in metrics that would require us to be virtual again. So may I have a motion to adjourn our meeting for this evening?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Urban?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Kachkowski?
Yes.
Ms. Deck?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Gluskin?
Yes.
And that motion passes. We are adjourned. Have a great evening, everybody.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.